The city that architect Le Corbusier designed from scratch, with its wide avenues and sectors numbered like squares on a chessboard, has a certain geometric allure. The promise that everything can be organized, calculated, and controlled. Vikram Sehgal grew up in Sector 22, in a two-bedroom apartment that smelled of cardamom and used textbooks. His father was a government employee. His mother taught math at a public high school. They weren't poor, but they knew exactly how thin the line was between stability and ruin. Vikram was the second child. Intelligent, yes, but not the kind of intelligence that fills notebooks with formulas. He was observant. He knew how to listen. From a very young age, he knew how to make a person feel understood without revealing anything about himself. His classmates would remember him years later as a pleasant person, vague. No one could describe exactly what he was thinking or what he wanted. And that, over time, would turn out to be exactly what he was looking for. He studied systems engineering at Punjab University. He graduated in 2009 with a decent record, though nothing particularly brilliant. He began working at a technology services company in Gurgaon, on the outskirts of Delhi, where he processed data for overseas clients. The work was routine. The salary was enough. But Vikram had his sights set elsewhere, and that elsewhere had a name: the United States. He tried twice for the H-1B visa. Twice. The lottery excluded him. The lottery system that regulates foreign workers' access to the U.S. labor market is, in essence, a gamble. Tens of thousands of applications. A few thousand slots. Luck as the filter. Vikram waited. Vikram tried again. Meanwhile, in 2013, his family arranged what they considered a good marriage. Her name was Priya Malhotra, the daughter of a doctor from Patiala. Well-educated, calm, with a smile her parents described as patient. They met during 3 formal gatherings with the families present, chai served in porcelain cups, and conversations focused on the future. 6 weeks later, the wedding date was set. The ceremony took place in January 2014 with over 200 guests. Garlands of orange marigolds hanging from the doorways, and the sound of tolls marking the rhythm of the Bharat. Priya arrived, dressed in a red sari embroidered with gold thread. Vikram looked at her with an expression that everyone interpreted as emotion. She was happy, genuinely happy. What no one saw was what Vikram was carrying on his head that afternoon. The third visa application, which had been pending for 3 months. Their first son was born in 2015. They named him Arav. Their second, Ishan, arrived in January 2016. Priya managed the household, raised the children, and waited. Vikram sent money at the end of the month and called on Sunday nights, always between 8 and 9, always from the same number. He was punctual. He was polite. He was, on the surface, a husband working far away to build a better life. In September 2016, the H-1B visa was approved. 3 months before leaving, Vikram did something Priya never knew about. He traveled to a family court in a small district, 2 hours from Chandigarh. He brought documents. There was a private conversation. There was money. The judge on duty, whose name would appear 4 years later in local newspaper headlines for systematic corruption, signed a divorce decree. Priya's name appeared in the record as a consenting party. She had not signed anything. She had not been notified. She did not know that meeting had taken place. Under Indian law, Vikram and Priya were still married. Under Vikram's plan, they were not. On September 4th, 2016, Priya saw him off at the front door with the 2 children in her arms. He was carrying a medium-sized suitcase, waved to the neighbors, and hugged his mother. The flight was leaving Delhi bound for Newark. Priya thought she was seeing her husband off toward their shared future. In reality, she was watching him walk away toward a life that didn't include either of them. 1,500 kilometers away, in the state of Colorado, Laura Mendenhall was ending a 4-year marriage that same year, childless and drama-free. It was the kind of separation that is signed off on in silence, without shouting or scenes, with the same coldness with which one closes a bank account that no longer has any activity. Laura was 34 years old. She had studied accounting at Colorado State University and worked for a decade in corporate auditing before moving into independent consulting. She was methodical. She liked numbers because they didn't lie, because a column that didn't balance was always a sign that something had gone wrong somewhere. That logic had served her well at work. With people, she had found it harder to apply. Her best friend since her 20s was Deborah Salinas, a woman with a direct temperament who had grown up in a Mexican family in Denver and who had a habit of speaking her mind before weighing the consequences. Deborah would later say, when investigators interviewed her, that Laura wasn't naive, that she was generous, and that was something entirely different, that she could see the best in someone even when that person didn't have it. In 2017, Laura accepted a consulting contract in New Jersey. She packed her bags, rented an apartment in a quiet suburb of Morris County, and started over. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She just wanted to work, settle down, stop being the woman who was rebuilding her life, and simply become someone who already had one. Two worlds, two stories unfolding in parallel without knowing it. It would be 2 years before their paths crossed. Parsippany, New Jersey, has the kind of anonymity that exists only in the suburbs of the American Northeast. Chain pharmacies on every corner, parking lots in front of restaurants serving a variety of cuisines, neighbors who wave from their cars and drive on by. It's a town that asks no questions. That was exactly what Vikram Sehgal needed. He could have settled in Edison, 20 minutes to the south, where the Indian community has been putting down roots for decades. Spice shops, temples, families who arrived in the 1970s and know everyone's last names. Someone would have asked him about his wife. Someone would have noticed he lived alone. Parsippany, on the other hand, was neutral, a place where a man could reinvent himself without uncomfortable witnesses. From 2016 to 2019, Vikram built a seamless routine. He paid his rent on time. He greeted his neighbors with measured courtesy. At the company where he worked as a systems analyst for a logistics firm, he was considered competent and reserved. No one knew much about him, and no one seemed to feel the need to know more. On the 1st of every month, a transfer went out from his account to Chandigarh. On Sundays at 8 o'clock at night, he dialed a number on an Indian calling app and spoke with Priya for exactly 1 hour. He asked about the children. She told him. He listened with the same calculated patience with which he did everything else. The phone held 2 distinct worlds. Calls to Priya came through a voice-over IP app with no visible notifications. Her photos were in an unnamed, password-protected folder. The rest of the device was harmless. Work apps, a few local contacts, nothing to raise questions. Vikram waited. He knew what he needed, a U.S. citizen who trusted him enough to file an immigration petition. His work visa tied him to his employer. A single contract termination, and he would have 60 days to leave the country. Permanent residency through employment for Indian citizens involves waiting lists that can stretch for decades, but there was another path, shorter and cleaner. Marriage to a U.S. citizen. No lottery. No employer. No indefinite wait. He just needed to find the right person. In October 2019, a technology company in Morris County hosted a networking event at a roadside hotel. Rooms with corporate lighting, high tables with glasses of white wine, business cards passing from hand to hand. Laura Mendenhall was there for a new contract. She was chatting with industry acquaintances when Vikram approached. He asked her about her work, not in a superficial way, but with the kind of attention that makes a person feel like what they say truly matters. She talked about auditing, the transition to consulting, the challenges of working independently. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked a single, precise question that showed he had processed every word. 2 days later, a text message. It referenced something specific Laura had said that night. It wasn't flirting, it was genuine interest. Their first dinner was in November 2019. Vikram chose a quiet restaurant without loud music where they could actually talk. He spoke of his childhood in Chandigarh with just the right amount of nostalgia, without going overboard. He mentioned a previous relationship in India that hadn't worked out. He didn't give details. He said he valued honesty above all else in a relationship. He said it while looking her in the eyes, with a conviction that left no room for doubt. By January 2020, they were seeing each other every weekend. By August, Laura had moved her things into Vikram's apartment. Deborah Salinas, who lived a 2-hour drive away, noticed the change in their phone calls. Laura spoke of him with a caution unusual for her, as if mentioning him too much might break something. Deborah listened. She held back her questions. In April 2021, on a Tuesday night, with no restaurant chosen and no setting prepared, Vikram proposed to her in the kitchen. A ring. Silence. Laura looked at him for a moment before answering. That night she wrote in her journal, which she had kept since she was 22. No scenes, no performance, just him and me and a ring. And the feeling that this is exactly right. The wedding was in June 2021. 22 guests, all on her side. Vikram explained that his family hadn't been able to travel. Visa complications, health restrictions that still persisted in the wake of the pandemic. Laura didn't question their absence. She had no reason to. On the marriage form, Vikram declared a previous marriage dissolved and attached the decree from Chandigarh with a certified translation. The county clerk processed it without issue. There was no system in place to call a remote court in Punjab to verify the authenticity of a signature. Vikram knew this. On the day he signed that document, Priya Malhotra was still his wife under Indian law. The marriage to Laura was null and void from the very first moment. But Laura left the registry office believing she had just married the man she loved. That night, as the last guests said their goodbyes and the lights in the small rented hall went out one by one, Priya Malhotra bathed her children in Chandigarh, read them a story, and waited for the call on Sunday. 3 days remained. In September 2021, Laura hired and paid for an immigration lawyer herself to begin the process of securing permanent residency for Vikram. She gathered the documents with the same meticulousness she applied to her audits. Joint lease agreement, bank statements, wedding photos, affidavits. The divorce decree from Chandigarh, with a notarized translation, was included in the file without anyone questioning it. On March 14, 2022, permanent residency was approved. Vikram read the notification on his computer screen. He saved it in a folder. He didn't say anything in particular that night. 14 days later, he bought 3 plane tickets. The changes began so gradually that it took Laura weeks to put her finger on them. Vikram had become distant, as if a sheet of glass had been placed between them. He was still kind. He still had dinner with her. But something about his presence had shifted. He was there without really being there. He responded without listening. He smiled at the right moments, but with a slight delay, as if following a script he knew by heart. Laura attributed it to work. He mentioned a difficult project, a demanding client. She didn't press the issue. One night in April, while they were preparing dinner, she heard his voice coming from the studio. He was speaking in Punjabi, in a low voice. It wasn't unusual for him to call his family in India, but something in his tone made her pause. Then she heard, clearly, a child's voice on the other end of the line. When Vikram came out of the studio, Laura asked him who he was talking to. He answered without hesitation. His nephew, from Chandigarh. a boy he liked to call out of the blue. Laura nodded. But that night she wrote in her journal, "He doesn't have any nephews. His brother isn't married. Maybe I got him confused." She hadn't gotten him confused. In May, Deborah called her from Denver. Laura spoke little, choosing her words carefully. She said Vikram was acting strange, that she felt he was manipulating her rather than loving her. Deborah asked what she meant by that. Laura replied that she didn't know exactly yet. On the second call, 3 weeks later, she said something Deborah would never forget. "I feel like there's a version of this story that he knows, and I don't." Deborah asked if she wanted her to come visit. Laura said it wasn't necessary, that she was probably overreacting. She wasn't overreacting. June 28, 2022, was a Tuesday, with nothing out of the ordinary. Vikram had left early. Laura sat down at the dining room table with her computer to review a pending report. The laptop they shared was closer. She picked it up without thinking. The screen opened directly to the browser. The airline session was still active. In the center of the screen, a booking confirmation. 3 passengers. Route Amritsar Newark with a connection in Frankfurt. Departure date June 12th. Laura read the first passenger's name twice before her brain processed what she was seeing. Priya Malhotra de Sehgal. Below, 2 more names. Arav Sehgal, 8 years old. Ishan Sehgal, 6 years old. Vikram's last name. On a woman and 2 children she had never heard mentioned. And the date, June 12th, 16 days ago. The flight had already landed. Those people were somewhere in the United States right now. Laura didn't close the screen. She took a picture of it with her phone. Then she went to the study. The door was unlocked, which was unusual. Inside, the desk had a drawer ajar. Inside the drawer, a manila folder. Inside the folder, documents organized with the same precision Vikram applied to everything. 3 B2 visa approvals, 2 birth certificates in Punjabi with partial English translations, and a multi-page document with an official letterhead that mixed English and Punjabi, and whose legal nature Laura couldn't determine exactly. She photographed everything. She sent the images to Deborah with a single message. All of this was in a folder on his desk. "If I don't contact you by tomorrow night, take it to the police." Deborah replied in less than a minute. Laura didn't answer right away. She was reading the birth certificates for the second time, pausing at the column listing the father's name, Vikram Sehgal, on both. She called Deborah at 11 o'clock at night. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Deborah would later tell the investigators that Laura's voice contained neither tears nor panic. She was still, completely still. And that frightened her more than anything else. Laura had a plan. She would wait for Vikram to leave the next day. She would search the studio more thoroughly. She would call her immigration lawyer to understand what it meant to have submitted fraudulent documentation without knowing it. She would call a family lawyer. She would document everything before confronting anything. Before hanging up, she said 3 words in a low voice. Deborah understood. She didn't respond. She stayed on the line until Laura hung up. The next morning, after Vikram left, Laura returned to the study. She took her time looking through everything. Underneath the manila folder, she found a second, thicker envelope. It contained a lengthy legal document bearing the letterhead of a family court in Chandigarh, dated 2016. It was bilingual. On page 3, in the section listing the parties involved, Priya Malhotra's name appeared as a consenting party to the divorce. Laura had paid for Vikram's permanent residency process. She had included that very decree in the immigration file as proof that he was legally single. Now, she held in her hands the possibility that the document was fake and that therefore their marriage had no legal standing. She photographed the entire envelope. She sent everything to Deborah with a single line. "I think the divorce wasn't real," Deborah replied immediately. Laura didn't answer. Deborah called twice that afternoon, Voicemail both times. She left a message at 7 o'clock that night. "Call me when you can. I'm here." No reply. At 10:22 p.m., a neighbor's doorbell camera recorded Laura Mendenhall walking out the front door. She was wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. No purse, no phone, no jacket, even though the night was cold for late June. She walked at a normal pace toward the east. She didn't look back. That was the last documented image of Laura Mendenhall alive. What happened inside that house between the moment Vikram arrived home from work and the moment Laura walked out the door, no one knows for sure. The neighbors didn't hear anything. There is no recording. There are no witnesses. Just a door that opened at 10:22 p.m. and a woman who never walked through it again. The next day, Deborah drove 2 hours to Parsippany. Vikram opened the door calmly. He said Laura had left after an argument, that he assumed she was at a friend's house, that sometimes she needed space, that he wasn't worried. Deborah dialed 911 from the driveway. Detective Andres Fuentes had been with the Morris County Prosecutor's Office for 19 years, 14 of those in the Major Crimes Unit. Over time, he had learned to read missing persons reports the way one reads police dispatches. Not what they say, but what they leave out. When Laura Mendenhall's report landed on his desk, he focused on 3 details. No purse, no phone, no jacket. A night in late June with temperatures at 12 degrees Celsius. Following a domestic argument. This wasn't someone who had decided to leave. Fuentes took the case 48 hours after Deborah's call. His first move was to check the security footage. In less than a day, he had the recording from the neighborhood security camera. Laura, walking east at 10:22 p.m., alone, at a steady pace, without looking back. The image was clear. What it didn't show was what had happened before that door opened. Laura's phone was recovered 2 days later in a park less than 2 kilometers from the house. The battery was dead. The casing had no fingerprints. None. Fuentes interviewed Vikram on the 3rd day. He arrived with a lawyer. He appeared calm, cooperative on the surface, precise in his answers. They argued over money, he said. She got upset and left. He went to sleep thinking she would come back. In the morning, she was gone. She didn't call anyone because she didn't want to cause a panic for no reason. It was something Laura did sometimes. She needed some fresh air, some time alone. Fuentes listened to everything without interrupting. At the end, he asked a single question. "Why did you hire a criminal defense attorney before we named you a person of interest?" Vikram didn't answer. Neither did his lawyer. The phone records arrived that same week. Among the data, a line that Fuentes flagged immediately. A secondary number linked to a VoIP app with systematic weekly calls over 6 years. Always on Sundays. Always between 8 and 9 p.m. Always to the same number in Chandigarh, Punjab. The number was registered to Priya Malhotra of Segal. Fuentes requested the complete immigration file. He found the divorce decree from Chandigarh. He sent an urgent inquiry to the Interpol liaison office in New Delhi. The response arrived 6 days later. The judge who had signed Segal's decree in 2016 had been suspended in 2019 and charged in 2020 with systematic corruption. Among the charges, 43 forged court documents related to family law. The Segal case was on the list. The decree was null and void. Under Indian law, Vikram and Priya had never ceased to be married. The marriage to Laura had no legal standing from day one. Everything Vikram had built rested on a piece of paper that had never been real. A second search of the residence, authorized by court order, yielded the discovery that changed the course of the case. In the study, on the carpet, and along the bottom edge of the desk, the forensic team recovered biological material consistent with a struggle. The samples were sent to the state laboratory. Fuentes also requested Vikram's DNA profile. It was not necessary to obtain it by court order. When Vikram had filed his application for permanent residency, The standard form included mandatory biometric data, including a DNA sample, stored in the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Federal Identification Database. The system designed to process his immigration case became the system that would identify him. The results arrived 17 days after Laura's disappearance. The DNA recovered from under Laura Mendenhall's fingernails matched Vikram Sehgal's profile. She had fought back. That same afternoon, using cell tower data from Vikram's phone corresponding to the night of June 28th, cross-referenced with travel routes and a search operation coordinated with state police, investigators located Laura Mendenhall's remains in a wooded area of Morris County, 16 kilometers from the house. The cause of death was head trauma from a blunt force impact. The time frame established by the medical examiner, between 10:00 p.m. and midnight on June 28th. Laura had walked out that door at 10:22 p.m. She was dead before the hour was up. The arrest warrant was issued the following morning. Fuentes coordinated with the Port Authority Police and the TSA at Newark Liberty International Airport. They found Vikram Sehgal at an airline check-in counter at 6:40 a.m. His flight to Delhi was scheduled to depart at 9:15 a.m. He was carrying a single carry-on bag. There was no checked luggage. He hadn't notified his employer. He hadn't said goodbye to anyone. He was arrested without resistance. He didn't say a word. As the state investigation progressed, Priya Malhotra remained in a hotel room in Newark with her 2 children. She had arrived on June 12th, believing she was starting a new life. Vikram had visited her 2 days after her arrival. 45 minutes, without clear explanations, with the vague promise that there were complications to resolve. After June 28th, he stopped answering her calls. She dialed his number 17 times in 4 days. Nothing. Fuentes went to the hotel with an interpreter. He explained what had happened. He told her there was another woman, that this woman had disappeared, that Vikram was the prime suspect. Priya listened to everything in silence. Then she said, "He told me the divorce was a legal formality for the visa paperwork, that I was still his real wife." She was silent for a moment. "Is that woman alive?" Fuentes told her that Laura had not yet been found at that time. Priya was interviewed 4 times over the following weeks. She knew nothing of Laura's existence. She played no part in the events of June 28th. She faced no charges. In August 2022, she boarded a flight back to Chandigarh with her children. She arrived in the United States believing the wait was over. She left knowing that the future they had promised her had never existed. The trial opened on March 6, 2023, in the Morris County Superior Court. 21 days of hearings. Vikram Sehgal did not testify at any of them. The courtroom had that particular atmosphere of long trials. Lawyers with folders marked with colored dividers, journalists in the back rows taking notes by hand. Laura's relatives occupying the seats on the left side, with the stillness of those who have already processed the worst and now only wait for the state to confirm it aloud. Deborah Salinas arrived on the first day and returned every one of the following 21 days. Same seat, 3rd row, left side, directly behind the prosecution table. She did not speak to the press at any time. The defense built its argument on 2 pillars. The first, the DNA was consistent with physical contact during an argument initiated by Laura, not with a premeditated attack. The second, the doorbell footage showed Laura walking alone at a normal pace, with no visible signs of panic or coercion. If she had been threatened or restrained, they argued, the image would have been different. The prosecution responded with a timeline. Green card approved, March 14th, 2022. Tickets purchased for the immediate family, March 28th, 2022. A 14-day gap. Biological material consistent with a struggle in the studio. Vikram's DNA under Laura's fingernails. His phone in a nearby park. Dead battery, no fingerprints. Cell towers pinpointing his device in the area where the remains were found in the early hours of June 29th. Arrested at the airport, 18 hours after the DNA results reached the prosecution, with a carry-on bag, no luggage, no goodbyes. The assistant prosecutor addressed the jury with a single argument. Vikram Sehgal did not kill Laura Mendenhall in a moment of rage. He killed her because she had ceased to be useful and had begun to be a risk. The only thing that changed that June night was that Laura discovered the truth. And he had already decided, long before, what happened to people who reached that point. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty. First-degree murder. All charges. The judge handed down the sentence 4 weeks later. 28 years without the possibility of parole. The moment the verdict was read, Vikram Sehgal looked straight ahead. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the prosecution. He didn't look at the seat where Deborah Salinas had been sitting for 21 days with her hands in her lap. The federal charges were resolved in September 2023. 2 counts of immigration fraud, the forged divorce decree filed with USCIS, and the false statement of marital status on the county marriage form. An additional 7 years to be served consecutively. 35 years in total. Permanent residency was revoked. A deportation order was issued to take effect upon completion of the sentence. She will be over 70 years old by the time she is eligible to leave the United States. Laura Mendenhall's immigration file was reviewed by federal prosecutors as part of the process. The attorneys determined that she had acted in good faith at all times. She had submitted documentation she considered legitimate. She faced no legal consequences of any kind. Her name was removed from the record with a note that officials rarely write: victim of the process, not a participant. Deborah Salinas made a single public statement 3 months after the verdict in a brief interview with a local media outlet covering the case. She said that Laura had kept a diary since she was 22, that she wrote everything down, that this habit, which Laura never considered important, ended up being one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the case. The record of the call in which she heard the child's voice, the note about the nephew who didn't exist, the description of the change in Vikram's behavior after March 14th. She also said that the last diary entry was written on the night of June 28th, after photographing the documents and before calling her. She didn't reveal the full content. She only said it ended with a line that Laura had underlined twice. I always thought the worst thing was not trusting people. It turns out there's something worse. Deborah didn't explain what Laura meant by that. It wasn't necessary. Priya Malhotra returned to Chandigarh in August 2022 with Arav and Ishan. She resumed the life she had led before Vikram left, only now without the promise that it would one day end. Her parents welcomed her back without asking questions. Her neighbors, who had watched her husband leave with a suitcase toward a future that never arrived, didn't say much either. In the Punjab, there is a kind of silence reserved for women whom life returns to where they started without any decent explanation. Under Indian law, Priya had never ceased to be the lawful wife of Vikram Sehgal. The decree signed by the corrupt judge was declared null and void, along with the other 42 cases in the 2020 docket. That meant, in strictly legal terms, that she was the widow of a man who was still alive and imprisoned in New Jersey, convicted of murdering a woman whose existence she had not known until a detective sat across from her in a hotel room in Newark with an interpreter and told her the truth. No one had asked her what she wanted to do with that information. Andres Fuentes closed the physical file on the Mendenhall-Sehgal case in October 2023, after the federal charges were finalized. He filed it away in the solved cases section, among dozens of folders with names most people will never know. Before putting it away, he looked one last time at the photograph of the doorbell. Laura walking eastward. No purse, no phone, no jacket. At 10:22 p.m. on a June night. Fuentes had learned over 19 years that cases don't end when a sentence is handed down. They end, if they end at all, at some undefined point later, when the people left behind manage to build something from the pieces. Some manage to do so. Others carry the weight in silence for years. Very few find the exact words to describe what they lost. He closed the folder. He turned off the desk lamp. And outside, in the city that continues to ask no questions, life went on exactly as before.